Hi YouTubers. So today I am going to be doing a review of the new Insta360 studio software for the Mac and PC version 4.0.0 beta. So for a long time now, I've had the Insta360 camera, and I love the camera, and I use it to shoot videos and I use it to shoot photos as well. And the thing that's always been, and it is absolutely a wonderful camera. I do love it. It takes excellent pictures and it takes excellent video. But one of the key drawbacks I would say with using this, and I think there are a few people out there that may agree with me, is the editing software. It's great once you have the camera out and about when you're taking photos and shooting, but when you get back into editing in post, that is where sometimes the experience can really be changed. And so now the Insta have now dropped their new version of their software. Let's check it out. So this is the previous Insta360 Studio 2021. So this is version 3.6.8. So as you can see, I think I'd say it's quite well laid out. I think it could be slightly better, but on the whole, it's not too bad. So on the left-hand side, you've got where you import everything, so where you import your photos and your videos. And then on the bottom, you've got your timeline, which is fairly standard. Then obviously your preview screen in the center. It's the top left where I think things always got a bit worse, I feel, on the Insta software front. So on the basic settings, then you've got your stitching options. Then you've got another tab for your media option, then another tab for your file properties. So the menus become available when you import some media, either photos or videos. So I prepared some in advance of when I did a walk the other day. So as you can see now, you can get the various options on the right hand side, and to be honest with you, I don't see any reason why you couldn't fit all of the options in one screen, because there just aren't that many. So for example, on the basic settings, you've got your stabilization settings here, then you've got your stitching settings down here, and then underneath, logo settings. So for example, you could put a logo on the bottom right hand corner. Let's say for example you have a YouTube channel, you could always invent a logo or make a logo and put it on the bottom, or whatever you want to put it really. You've got a choice of where to put the logo. Then you have to click on a separate tab for the media preferences. But as you can see here, there are only really two options. It's the image processing, which for the Aquavision, which I don't have. You have to buy a special kit for that. Or you get the true audio options, which allow you to, when you're processing your footage, to single out whether you want it to be voice focused or action focused, which I think, fairly self-explanatory there. Then you've got your file properties, which are just a summary of the file that you've recorded, and it gives you some information, for example, like which camera you used, your resolution, your frame rate, all that good important stuff. But for the most part, I don't see why these all can't fit on the same menu here. So you've got your timeline options along the bottom. Depends on, again, what type of it depends on what type of view that you have as to what becomes available. So for example, this is the 360 degree view, so a lot of these options are not going to be available, whereas if you go to free capture, for example, that then allows you to focus on a specific area, and then you will get the various options that appear at the bottom. Similar to the mobile app, but I do find the features lacking, I have to say. So for example, here you've got at marker keyframe, which is useful when you want to change the view of where the footage is. So for example, if you put a keyframe here and say, this viewpoint, then you can come further down. So for example here, and then you can press that keyframe again and you can, zoom in or zoom out, or, just change the view basically to be wherever you want. Then you've got this option here, which is to delete the selected keyframe. This one in particular is the key, Deep Track. Now, on the PC or the Mac, Deep Track, you really don't get that as many options as you do, for example, when you're using it on your phone. Deep Track allows you to, for example, focus on a subject and then track that subject no matter where they go. So, it's a good, for example, if you've got a high action shot where like let's say 5 minutes, where let's say somebody comes running along the front of this here, what you can do is you can actually have it so that it focuses on that person and pans and follows them. But that's really all you can do on the PC version. Whereas on the phone version, there's all sorts of things you can do. So I have to say, I'm a bit surprised that it was always lacking on the PC version. Then here you've got time shift, which allows you to increase the time frame of any specific recording. So, for example, you could, for like 10 seconds, you could you could increase the time frame on it so that it goes like faster, like 2 times faster or 3 times faster or 4 times faster. And here are where you get into your editing. So for example, if I were to place my cursor here, if I press this option here, it then starts the video export from this point. And let's say I were to put my cursor here, if I press the opposite on the end, that will then drag it and it will end the export at this point. And these just basically, allow your cursor to jump back to the beginning or jump back to the end, and that's it. So let's now compare the latest version of the software to see what the differences are. So when the download's complete, then if I press install update, it will launch the installer. And this brings me to one problem I always have with the Insta360 Studio software for some reason, and it's never changed with any version. So you come through to the menu and select your language, and then it says, for example, you have an outdated version, and to continue installation, the outdated version will be uninstalled, which is, fair enough. That's what you want, isn't it? So you press yes, and then do I wish to delete user preferences? Now I'll say no for this. Accept, press next, next again, and then it says yes, do you wish to, the folder it already exists, do you wish to install in that folder anyway? So I say yes, which is quite normal. That's what I normally do when a program updates, but for some reason in this case it always comes up with this error message, and effectively it says error code 5, which is a read-write error. And effectively what it's trying to do is it's trying to then rewrite a DLL that's already open in an open program, which I think is quite an odd thing, because for most programs, when you run an update, generally they have something coded in them that will shut down the original program so that no active files are in use. And I don't understand why, but for some reason Insta don't seem to do that, and I don't know why. And obviously you're not going to skip that file. So to get around it, all you have to do in the background is to close that Insta software and then try again, and it works. Perhaps they're not expecting you to install over the original program, and they're expecting you to install in a fresh folder every single time. But I have to admit, they'd be one of the only vendors that I know that do that, because obviously if you upgrade into the latest software, you want to overwrite what's there previously. So I have no idea why they do that, but there you go. And it's happened with every single release. So version 4.0.0 beta is no exception. It still does that. So this is the new Insta360 Studio 2021 version 4. So as you can see, it does look quite different. I think it looks a bit more modern, a bit more snazzy, and the layout is certainly very similar. So on the left, it's still on the left-hand side where you import your files. Your timeline will still be on the bottom, and on the right-hand side will still be your file options. So if I now open my series of files again, now this time it's a bit more minimal in the interface, I would say. So you've got your videos on the left-hand side, and again you can change them. This is the thumbnail view, but you can, for example, change it to be a simple thumbnail view, which in my mind is not really useful, because unless you've got hundreds here, which I doubt you. Well, you may do, I suppose. You can have it in list view, or you can have it in list view. That didn't bode well, did it? You can have it in list view as well, but yeah, I do prefer this view, I have to say. So you do have different options this time on the actual view itself. So when you can see that it allows you to scrub through. Again, I don't know why that's even important, because maybe if you need to tell what the video is, I don't know. You've also got options here as well. For example, it says auto frame. Now, auto frame, I believe, goes through the video and allows you to, I think it's more for photos, to have more photos in mind. So I think what it does is it goes through your video and selects the best frames which it feels would give you the best photographs. And here obviously you can favourite. Now, I don't know about most people, but for me, when I'm processing videos, generally I only process that day's footage, and even then I'm already processing it in the Insta software. I think it would be great if you could, and to be honest with you, and I think you'll see my disappointment in a little while, I think the problem with the software is I was expecting big functionality improvements, and unfortunately I don't feel that you really got them. I think that the layout has changed, and I think it's going to be 50-50 as to whether people like the layout or not. Personally, I'm getting used to it, I think is the best way of putting it. I think whilst it looks good, it's not particularly functional, and therefore it's not really worth it in a way. but there are always going to be other improvements, obviously, with the latest version. So here at the top then you've got the difference between local files, camera files. I don't have my camera plugged in. Favorites, and then exports. So here again you've got your video, but this time it occupies more of the screen, so you don't get your options on the side as readily viewable as they were before. Slider works in a similar way as it did before. Yeah, as I say, you can move the slider and you can jump to any point in time, which is great, which is the same as it was before. This time, you have to come over here to look at the options. So there is one or two extra options here, but they are actually hidden, so you have to look for them. So for example, if we were to select deep track, then you highlight around the object that you wish to track and then let go and then start tracking. Now before, that was the only option you had, and it would actually track the object as you're moving around, just like before. Only this time you get a few more options. So what you do is, if you stop tracking, if you hover your mouse over the original track, you'll see here you actually get two options here. So you've got I'm guessing that's a field of view control, and then you've also got a distortion control. Funnily enough, Insta themselves don't really discuss these features very much, so it's a bit difficult to actually glean what they're for. I mean, I did watch, for example, there is, if you head over to the Insta website, there is actually a version 4 new features, and it's not listed. So I don't know why they haven't listed them as the features, but never mind. It is very similar to how it was before. You don't really get many options, whereas when you're doing it on the phone, for example, you get a lot more options. So you can actually in real time as the video is playing, you can, for example, press your thumb on the phone screen and you can actually move and pan around live whilst you're doing it, and it will do a live track of where you want to see as well as the actual object being tracked, which is really good. But unfortunately it doesn't do that on the PC version. So it's much similar again, so you can trim the footage in the same way as you could before by dragging it from the left across. It's not, before you did actually have buttons to do it, whereas now you do click and drag, which I think's better actually. I do like that, I do prefer that, I'm not going to lie, that is a better. Here you can zoom in and zoom out of the timeline, which again is very similar to what it was before. So here you've got your reframe, well they're calling it reframe, or you've got your 360 degree view again, which is very similar to what it was before. The only difference being, and this is the key difference I'd say between the old software and the new, for example, if you were on this 360 view and then pressed export, that would automatically export in 360. If you're in this, what they're calling reframe, or this actual physical view where it only, for example, doesn't record the whole 360, it only records where you wish to point the camera. If you then would go down to the right hand side and click start export, it would only export that video in that format. However, that is not the same in the new version. It's actually when you come to export it that you get to choose whether you want the 360 or whether you want your normal. So these two are largely not relevant unless you're editing effectively, just to change the views. The output is not affected. So over here then you get all your options on the right hand side. So you've got your stabilization type here, your flow state stabilization and direction lock. Flow state stabilization I always keep on anyway, because I like the software. The software is going to know from the camera, from the designers, is going to know the best way to stabilize. Yep, so you've got direction lock, which locks you in the single direction. If you're heading south, for example, and you suddenly turn and move towards the east, if you don't have the direction lock on, it will keep on going to the south. The camera will keep viewing. The camera will keep viewing to the south. Whereas if you click that direction lock, the camera will, if the camera's facing in a certain direction, no matter where you turn the camera, it will always turn with you, which is really handy. And then you've got stitching is actually on a separate tab. So I think I understand why they've separated them. I don't think it makes things any easier, personally. It's just more buttons to click in the process, and there aren't many things around. But I'm guessing their attempt was to declutter the screen, which I can understand. I was kind of hoping for, as I say, for more options here, to be honest. Dynamic stitching and chromatic calibration, I generally have both ticked on. And then if you press that calibrate, it then will remove any stitch lines, or as many stitch lines as humanly possible the software can remove. And it does work for sure, especially if you're using the invisible selfie stick, because with the invisible selfie stick, usually where at the bottom of the invisible selfie stick where the handle is, you can sometimes see stitch lines around that area. And yeah, it does remove those pretty effectively for the most part, and sometimes you still get it, but these are all exactly the same, I think. There may be one or two options I'm not sure of. The True Audio and Acrovision are the same, no changes there. The logo settings again, separate tab, but again, same thing. This is different. which is quite cool actually. They've included a project manager feature, which I quite like. It's quite good actually. So what that means is, for example, if you've imported your Insta files, sometimes you want to process only a certain section of it and export it. For example, you might want to change the view around. You might want to do some tricks, make it look good. And you may, for example, want to lift that out of the timeline. So by creating a new project, it gives you the opportunity to effectively take that file and take a snapshot. So let's say you've imported a file, you can create 2 projects using the same file, and it means then you don't have to remove all of your edits. And then, if you want to export it again, or you want to try and change it again, you don't have to do that. So, for example, you can create a new project again, and then it will effectively bring you back to the original file, and it's unedited, which is great. So you can make all the edits you want in this particular one, and in this one here, all those edits are gone, which is really handy, actually. I do like that. That is something that's good. And here you've got your file properties, which is largely the same as the original software. So when you come to export then, that's where things get a bit different. So for example, as I said before, this is where you control the option for whether it's going to be 360 or whether it's going to be a reframed video. So that is slightly different than it was before. Your file path remains the same. Preset parameters is quite good actually. I do like it if it actually did more. And I'll explain what I mean. So for example, down here, this is where you control your bitrate, your resolution, and then your encoding format. For example, you've got the H.264, the H.265, or if you're like me, for example, and you want to export to a Mac and use Final Cut Pro, then you use the ProRes option. Now, from here, for example, you can't really control the frame rate. I've filmed it in 24 frames a second, so that's generally the frame rate I prefer. So I've filmed in that. Now, what you can do here is you can actually click Save. So what you can do is then you can actually create a new preset. And what that means is that those options will now be saved. So the next time you import a video file, those options will be saved, and then you don't have to keep, tweaking them or reset or, adjusting them. However, the question is, what is saved? And that's where I think it falls over. The only thing that's saved is the encoding format. That's it. And sorry, encoding format, basically anything in this section, resolution, encoding format, and remove grain. That is it. They are the only things that are saved. Now, I know that I'm not being ungrateful. It's a nice feature and it is good to have for sure. But I wish that it would actually save those editing options as well. And what I mean is, for example, typically I always do the same things when I come on my videos. I click the direction lock. I click on the dynamic stitching and the chromatic calibration. I click on calibrate. I come down to the true audio and I click voice focus. Now, I always do that for every single video. So for me, it would have been nice if those export features and that export save preset actually saved these things as a preset as well, because it is extremely rare that I don't click any of those options. Extremely rare. So you can see here now when I click 360 video that these options have saved. And as I say, it's just a real shame actually. It's just one or two small things I think that would improve the program immensely, and it's just such a shame that they haven't done those things. So that's the first thing I feel that the program could benefit from. The second thing I think is that I would like the videos to be merged into one. So for example, if I've been out for a day's recording, let's say, and I've recorded 3 different videos, I would like them all to be combined into one video rather than having to export 3 different videos and having to merge 3 different videos, because it's just not a time saver at all. It takes a long time to then do it in 3 separate videos, and I just don't like that. And it would be just so much easier if you could just have it as one. So but that's just my own thing. I'd prefer that. I mean, yes, I understand that when you're recording with the Insta, you do get a 30-minute time limit. And I think the idea behind that isn't necessarily that the camera can't go for longer. I think it's that just in case you have a problem with any of the files where, for example, there's some kind of corruption or some kind of issue with those files, I think the whole point is that it saves you so that if you do have an issue with anything, then you're not losing all of your files. But I would argue if you're going to do that, then 30 minutes is too long anyway, because if you've screwed up that particular video, you've screwed up 30 minutes anyway, and that has happened to me before now. I must admit, not so much with the Insta360 One X2. Generally, it was with the first One X that I had those issues with. For the One X2, I've only had it once, I believe, actually, where it's actually corrupted. and it hasn't been able to save the file properly at the end. But essentially, if you're going to do that, then you might as well cut it down to 4-minute intervals like the GoPro does, if that's what you're going to do. But if that's the case, then please give us the option to stitch all the files together so that we can then have one file, and that would make so much more sense. At least that's my feeling. So at the bottom, then you have start export, but you also have the option to add to queue, which is quite nice. But then again, is it? What's the difference between exporting one and exporting the whole queue? Well, there isn't really anything. I mean, yes, okay, what it does mean is that, for example, you, rather than having to export that video now, you could then come back and export it later on. But arguably, you could do that anyway with the previous software, because all you had to do was double-click on one video, export, and that's it. And if you didn't want to do it then you could come back 3 hours later, double-click on that video, and then click export. So, yeah, it doesn't really make much of a difference. I don't understand why the only reason to have a queue, in my opinion, is so that you can schedule it, and that is a good idea. Yes, for example, I know that there's an option in Adobe where, for example, you can get a separate bit of software called Adobe Media Encoder, where you can then edit all your footage in Adobe Premiere Pro and your projects, and you can queue them for export, and then you can come with the media encoder later on, and then you can schedule it, you can start it, stop it, pause it, and that's wonderful to have. Now, unfortunately, Insta don't really have any of those options at all, so I think, for example, to call it a queue is a bit much. Effectively, what you're saying is, I'm just going to encode each singular video at a time, and then all I'm going to do is just go on to the next one. And it's great to have a queue like that, but it's not really good for anything else. And I also think the key difference is, and this is where I think the new software falls down as well, and I'll show you in a second, I think that it also is different in the way that it exports, and it's actually worse. So I'll show you that right now. Right, so if you have more than one file here, for example, when you go to export, you can click on export all, for example, and as you can see here, it's exporting the first one with a ring around it, and it's actually doing the second one now. And you can actually see the process at the bottom. But unfortunately, where the previous Insta versions would actually show you the progress of the particular file that's exporting, as well as the overall batch or queue, in this case, it only shows you the overall queue. And I have to say, I don't like that. I preferred it when you saw both, because you could see them in a list and then you could see how much is available. Now, that I don't like. I think that's a step backwards, and I don't know why they've done that. Obviously, there's a reasoning for it, but I'm not sure what it is. So Insta themselves have actually posted a page where all of the new version 4.0.0 features are detailed in a 3-minute video, and I'll put a link for that in the description. So in conclusion then, I'll say I think the new Insta software is an improvement for sure. I think it is. It's definitely a step in the right direction, but I do think that the improvements, let's face it, I personally feel the improvements, I would say, are mostly visual. I'd say 90% are visual. And I think that they are moving in the right direction for sure. But they're just, I think if they'd have spent more time, for example, adding new features rather than tweaking the UI, I do think it would have been a lot better experience. But that being said, I have to say, I do love Insta products. I do love, for example, this is the one that I'm shooting on. So this is the Insta1 X2. And I have to say, it is an absolutely fantastic product. No question at all. I think they have cornered the 360-degree video market with their cameras. I think they are excellent in terms of, obviously, not just about taking photos, but taking video as well. I do think that Insta360, I think they're a wonderful company, I have to say, and I do think that they have excellent products, and it's just a shame, really. I mean, you can process the videos on your phone, of course, but let's face it, who's going to be able to do that? Especially, for example, if you have a lot of video footage, you really don't have that much space on your phone, so you really need to come back to your PC or your Mac. And I think that if you want to use those advanced features that the Insta software has to offer, you really do need to use a phone, for example, in order to process all of your footage. But even then, that being said, that's okay if you're only dealing with 1080p footage. But there are a lot of people like me, for example, that do prefer shooting in 4K, and I think that's where you have more of a problem in terms of space issues. So I have to say, with those suggestions aside, I think that they could improve the product quite a lot, actually. And I think, as I say, I think the key thing is like to be able to stitch them all into one export. Because I don't think that because not everybody is going to be using things like Adobe Premiere Pro or Final Cut Pro. So I think that they could have perhaps create the Insta to be more of an editing software. I don't think it's necessarily 100% important. And it would certainly be nice to be able to, merge those files into a single file, and just have one export. And I also think it would be nice to be able to schedule those exports and be able to pause them and come back to them later on. And I think that would improve the software no end. But I'm hoping that in future releases, Insta will be able to do things like that, and it would be wonderful if they could. So with that, I'll see you next time.